And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking. ABSA is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. It's been an astonishing day for platinum, going well above $1,100 to around $1,140 an ounce. There's been a lot of talk over the last few months. At some point, people suggesting platinum would sort of break up. The reason for this, of course, is we know that the amount of platinum that is actually available is slightly lower than people thought. Also, of course, many mines finding it very difficult to make money out of selling platinum at the moment. And at the same time, it seems demand is ticking up, and demand ticking up in China. Questions, of course, around whether we'll be driving electric cars or hybrid cars. Hybrid cars appear to be moving forward quite nicely. They do need platinum, and that's all having an impact as well. So interesting just to watch and having a big impact on the JSE today. And we'll talk about the nature of the JSE. It's sort of quite big sort of resource sector in investment school this evening, and I've made the point many times that the JSE has sort of been quite well balanced during all of the Trump tariff turmoil that we've seen. Really, I don't know kind of what to say about the IO investment story. The JSE issuing a public rebuke and a suspended fine of 500,000 Rand, saying essentially that IO, and you know, of course, who controls it, Dr. Iqbal Survey, essentially through Second did not tell shareholders everything they should have told. So in other words, withheld information from shareholders would be the technical language, when there was a sort of share buyback deal with the Public Investment Corporation. It was part of a settlement. You may remember during the sort of state capture era, a lot going on. And the PIC eventually bought shares in IO. That was sort of overturned, and as part of an agreement, essentially, in the end, there was this share repurchase. It was 619 million Rand. There's a sense, though, of, for me anyway, absurdity around the whole thing. It's a hardly traded stock. Why would anyone in their right mind withhold information from shareholders when the JSE is going to do this, and you know they're going to do it? So I sort of have questions about management. But you're also then, if that's what's going to happen, you're basically inviting anyone who does own your shares to never, ever have anything to do with you again. Because if you're putting shareholders in a position where they don't know everything they need to know, there's a breakdown in trust between you and shareholders. So the whole thing is sort of absurd on many levels. And I know, Second and Survey and others say, well, it's because of a media campaign that IO hasn't done. I mean, I think that's a very, very hard argument to sustain, frankly. Anyway, lots to come in the next little while. We'll talk to Turkcell's legal team. They're battling, of course, still against MTN. More on the NHI in a moment as well. Good to hear from you tonight on 011 8830702 021 4460567 and voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, of course, plenty going on around the NHI, and the queue of people who are now lodging cases against the NHI growing a little longer today. The Health Funders Association now announcing they'll be challenging government's NHI plans in court. Already several political parties, medical aid groups and others have said they're lodging cases against the NHI. The CEO of the Health Funders Association is Notshe Naidu. Notshe, good evening. I really appreciate the time. On what basis are you challenging the implementation of the NHI?
Good evening, and good evening to your listeners as well. So thank you very much. I think what we are fundamentally doing is we've done our analysis. We've hired a firm called Genesis Analytics, and to really cost out what are the implications of NHI, and what will happen to members, to the rest of the broader country. And that analysis showed us, that there are severe economic consequences for taxpayers and the small amounts of taxpayers we have, as well as for the impact on medical schemes, members whose access will be restricted. But if furthermore, they'll actually be paying 1.5 times to 2.2 times their current rate in tax. So all of this analysis, that we've done, we actually said, okay, we now need to go to the courts to seek clarity, and hopefully we'll get our way. So we're going to the courts to, one, ask for certain sections of the Act to be declared unconstitutional and invalid, or in an alternative, if that's not the case, for the entire act to be declared unconstitutional. So, and it's really down to a few things we are challenging. One is we believe the act is really unworkable. It's irrational. It prevents the right to access and actually doesn't enable a progressive realization of access to healthcare. So, and then the last one is we believe the act in itself is unconstitutional because it delegates legislative authority to the minister.
You claim, as I understand it in your argument, and I presume this is based on the Genesis Analytics analysis, that to do it, VAT would have to increase to 36%, and obviously that would be absurd. It can't happen. But government could quite well come with its own analysis, and now you're asking a judge to determine, which analysis is correct. It gets a bit sort of technical at that point.
Yeah, it can get very technical. I haven't to date seen anything presented by government other than back in the day of the 2010 analysis. So having said that, what Genesis analysis did was based on what's been promised in the NHI. And NHI was promised to provide the equivalent cover to all 61 million people that medical schemes enjoy today. And that was actually the modeling, the starting point. And then from there, we said, look, it is potential, Genesis had potential that under NHI, additional savings could be achieved. And that was encapsulated by 45.5% savings on what a current medical scheme person is. And we all looked at it and we said, when this actually extrapolates, it's physically impossible. Now, so whether I think what's important is between our challenge and the other challenges that have come forward, each of them have done economic analysis. Actually, almost all of them have done economic analysis, but all point to the same thing. NHI in its current format is fiscally impossible. We've done rigorous analysis to do this. In fact, our best estimate is actually we don't believe that NHI will achieve the 45.5% savings efficiency. And fundamentally, we didn't just want to be critiquing, about what NHI is. What we put on the table is we wanted to put a solution for the entire country, for all 61 million people. And that's where we've introduced a model that's workable and we believe is the way to achieve universal health coverage.
Okay. In your argument, you seem to be saying that poorer people would be affected disproportionately by the NHI. Now, government will say those are the people who are supposed to benefit the most. Why would poorer people suffer more? They don't have medical aids at the moment. Surely they would benefit more if the NHI came in.
Sure. Thanks. It's a great question. It's a slightly tricky answer to respond to, but let me try and do my best here. So currently, you've got medical scheme members. Medical scheme members are actually older than the public sector. Now, you might know this, in many of, including yourself, the older you get, the more healthcare utilization. It's unfortunately aging, chronicity linked.
Sure.
Now, what typically happens is if you take that pool of people, right, who are more aware of healthcare, you bunch them into a risk pool that is with the current 52 million. Medical scheme members, even if for a defined benefit package, for example, 100 Rand, medical scheme members will utilize 130 Rand. Now, if they use 130 Rand, less money is actually left over for the non-medical scheme members. And
I hear you, and the actuaries must have had fun with that, Tonish, and I wonder if it's a little bit of a bit of a reach, frankly. There are other cases. Why did you not join one of the other cases? And let me explain my question. Are you trying to deliberately make it harder for government by making them have more cases and therefore just delaying the whole thing a lot longer?
No, absolutely not. And, the other cases, we complement each other. So the cases in front of you are the private practitioners. So the doctors have provided one, SALM has provided one, and the hospitals. Each one of them have provided their view from their membership. We've brought to the table, based on our experience, and we represent 20 medical schemes and 3 administrators. So we brought the perspective and the view from the medical aid scheme. So by no means we actually trying to prolong it. And fundamentally, to be honest, going the legal route is not our preferred option. Because what's going to happen is we're going to be caught in the courts for 5 years. And during that 5 years, there's going to be a winner and loser. But who's going to be the biggest loser is actually healthcare. Because what we should be doing is getting around the table now and figuring out how we can reform healthcare for all 61 million people. And so ultimately, and we do hope, through BUSA and maybe through the president, we can find an amicable solution for NHI.
Notshe Naidu, thanks very much indeed. CEO of the Health Funders Association.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, lawyers representing the international cell phone network operator Turkcell say they believe MTN, yes, our MTN, is trying to, I suppose, run away from justice by asking the Constitutional Court to hear its case against Turkcell. Turkcell has consistently claimed that MTN paid bribes to both Iranian and South African officials to win a license in Iran. The license had already been awarded to Turkcell. It was then overturned and given to MTN. MTN has already lost a Supreme Court of Appeal case in which they argued South African courts do not have the jurisdiction to hear a case involving their activities in Iran. They're now asking for leave to appeal that to the Constitutional Court. Cedric Sole is counsel for Turkcell on the line now from the US. Cedric, good day to you. MTN's argument, as I understand it, is that our courts should not get involved in events that happen in other places. Why? Let me put this another way. This is all about events that happened in Iran. Why are you chasing MTN through our courts in South Africa?
Hi, Stephen. Good to talk to you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Great. Well, the first thing I'd say is no, it's not true. Not all of the events occurred in Iran. A lot of the events actually occurred in South Africa. The whole scheme that MTN devised to sort of take the license away from Turkcell was devised in South Africa, and a lot of the meetings that took place between the Iranians and the South Africans took place in South Africa. They brought the chief nuclear negotiator for Iran to South Africa for a meeting with, among other people, the former president of South Africa. So it's not just about conduct that occurred in Iran. It's a lot about conduct that occurred in South Africa.
Okay, but that could
that's why we say it should be prosecuted in South Africa.
But, I mean, couldn't that just be a coincidence? I mean, you would have to prove that a nuclear negotiator was involved in negotiating a cell phone network contract.
No, he wasn't involved in negotiating a cell phone contract. Our position is that after losing the license, MTN approached the Iranian government and they approached Turkcell's partners and said, guys, we will sweeten the deal for you. We will give you weapons. We will support your nuclear program, and we will give you better financial terms. And so this is and of course there were the bribes, and all of this happened after Turkcell won the license. And we say MTN did all of those things in an effort to get the Iranians to change their mind and then award the license to MTN.
Just so that
it's not coincidence.
Okay, just so I don't misunderstand, Cedric, you're suggesting that the South African government or someone in South Africa would give or offered to give Iran weapons and help with a nuclear program, which I would imagine the Iranians have been ahead of us in that for many, many years, in exchange for a cell phone network contract, really?
So we're saying that MTN used its connections with government, which are not a secret, and very publicly public information about that, used their connections in government to sweeten the deal. We have evidence showing that MTN brokered an introduction, for example, between, not anyone in the South African government, MTN brokered an introduction between Denel, the weapons company, and the partners, the Iranian partners of Turkcell in Iran for the license, for example. And in terms of the nuclear program, it's not in terms of developing the nuclear program, and I apologize if I misspoke. It's to provide support at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, because the Iranian program was being embargoed or shut down, and there was a promise made that the South African ambassador to the IAEA would support that program. And indeed, what ended up happening is South Africa consistently had voted against the Iranian nuclear program, and then, lo and behold, they suddenly started abstaining.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. I obviously have to ask you about the nature of this evidence. I mean, what evidence do you have that this happened and that it happened in South Africa? So, meetings, okay, but you would surely not be privy to what happened in the meetings unless someone in the meetings told you.
Well, it's again public. There is a whistleblower in this case who has come forward and provided evidence, and we have documents that for example, show that MTN paid $400,000 in connection with the license, paid $400,000 to an oil company in Dubai, and we have the sort of bank records from MTN showing that a $400,000 payment was made, and we will show that was the bribe that ended up being paid to an Iranian government official, for example, in connection with the license. So that's what we're asking ultimately, is we are asking for this case to be tried in court. It has not been tried in court. The merits of this dispute have not been adjudicated on by an independent judiciary, and we believe that the South African judiciary is best placed to do that.
Do you believe, I mean, because one of the arguments MTN has said is that this should be heard in Iran. I presume you believe then that our judiciary is more independent than Iran's, because you obviously oppose that.
Yes, I think that's a no-brainer. I think the judiciary in Iran is not independent. Iran is, for all intents and purposes, a religious dictatorship, and I think it's quite fascinating that MTN would suggest that we would get a fair shake in Iran, given the nature of the accusations that we have made against MTN.
Cedric Solet, thanks very much indeed. It's a fascinating case. Counsel for Turkcell will be a very important precedent-setting case, of course, and I imagine it may well go to the Constitutional Court. But just to get the argument about jurisdiction out of the way, still, of course, a long way to go in that case, one way or another.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Norman McKechnie is an independent investor. Norman, good evening. I made the point earlier that this IO story has a sort of tinge of the absurd about it, but still quite rare for the JSE to publicly rebuke a company for doing what really is a very bad thing, withholding information from shareholders.
I agree, Stephen. I think if one looks at it, I mean, just to go through the numbers, it was listed in July 2007, and the PIC, I think, paid $4.3 billion for 29% stake in the company, which valued it at about $4 billion. Over the next 2 years, the share price dropped from about 19 Rand to, 80% of that, so probably down to, what would that be? That would be about 4 Rand. It's currently trading at about 45 cents. But yeah, essentially the PIC were not happy with the investment information that was given. They felt that was misleading, and hence they wanted to settle. That was brought about in March 23. There was a settlement of about, as you mentioned, 619 million. Where they repurchased their 29% stake, which gave the share, I think, a valuation, or the company a valuation of about, I'm just having a quick look here, I think it's about 2 billion or so, and now they're offering to buy out the individuals. But yeah, I think the issue was when they did agree with the PIC, they did not publish the details, and they were censured on that. And that was the story. They were suspended also this year for a late publishing of their annual financial statements. So looking at all of that, not a pretty picture at all. And now they're offering, 81 million for to buy out the company, to buy it back at 52 cents per share. It's we've abolished capital punishment in South Africa, but not on the JSE.
Okay, very good. Platinum Group Metals, PGMs, really went very, very hard today. And I mean, I know there's been a bit of analysis. Will there be a sort of breakout? Platinum stocks are down. Is demand ticking up? What's led to this?
I think if you look at it, just a simple sort of analysis, if you just plot and I know a lot of the listeners won't have the information, but if you go into something like Trading Economics, which is a free app, and don't mean to advertise, you plot the platinum price against the Impala price, and you can see that there probably could be further upside because the two track one another. But essentially what you need to do is you need to look at the PGM basket. But what we've seen in platinum is jewelry and investment demand picking up in China. There has been profit taking, which we normally do see. There's been restocking, inventory build. Auto catalysts they've seen inventory being increased there as well. New emission regulations. As you said, electrical vehicles demand has slowed. Semiconductors, ruthenium, which is one of the byproducts that is picking up. And then we've seen constrained mine supply. So I think if you add all of that together and you look 18 months out, certainly consensus earnings looking pretty good, probably based on higher prices than what we see now for platinum, palladium and rhodium. And that's really, I think, the view and the sentiment that's actually driving shares at this point in time.
The dollar seems to me, and the rand was very strong against the dollar today, but the dollar just seems sort of almost drip, getting slightly weaker day after day. And I presume that's just about capital moving away, switching direction away from the US, but also just the sort of, uncertainty around Trump.
I think that's right. I think if one looks at it, just to start with Trump, I think he's a weak dollar president. That's what he wants to see. And I think that's the same ilk as what Nixon was. So that helps them in terms of their competitiveness. I think also what you've seen, without going into the details, there's been a lot of dollars that have been pushed into the system. They've got various accounts. It's a government account which they really use if there is like a hurricane, like we had Hurricane Andrew and Katrina, and that money is used just for debt or just for disaster relief. That's the right word. And that's been drawn down fairly sharply. So that money's been put into the system, and also we've got to realize that you've got a debt ceiling coming up. So they've pumped that money into the system. They've also done a bit of QE, which means basically buying bonds, the Treasury US bonds, although we could discuss that, what bond yields have done. But essentially, there's a lot of dollars floating around the system. I think tariffs as well in terms of the impact there, and then the budget which has been put forward, which is very much almost like a Liz Truss type of budget, where you've got a lot of issuance, a lot more debt, 2 trillion extra in the next 2 or 3 years being issued in bonds over and above what they will be issuing. And I think that just the market sentiment is that under those conditions the dollar should remain weak, and that's what we've seen.
Norman McKechnie, thanks very much indeed. Independent investor, just after 6:30.
Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Quite a lot going on around cars, driving license plates and licenses. And a couple of reports today suggesting that R2, which is the system that will introduce a demerit system. If you basically get fined too often, you will lose your license for a period, is going to come online soon. And another report today suggesting that in the Gauteng, new license discs, new registration plates, I saw this in News 24, are going to come in soon. And I mean, on both of these measures are good measures. They're things that we should welcome. They will be good for business. They will be good for everybody. It will stop the cloning of number plates. You'll actually be able to, and there's a sort of QR code in it, and police will be able to look at it, know exactly who owns it, things like that. All of that's very impressive and excellent. Let's do that. The demerit system is also a no-brainer. It's worked so well in other countries where if you are worried about losing your license, you just won't drive, as people drive. I mean, I just can't get over the number of times the person in front of me doesn't indicate one way or another. And what worries me, though, and I work in a place in Sandton in Johannesburg where probably 2 or 3 times a week there is a roadblock on the way home. And that's fine. Always treated with a great deal of respect and politeness. I have nothing to complain about. But I look the way that I do, and that might well be a factor. I think for other people, it might not be nearly as easy. And I think you can understand exactly what I'm saying. But I do worry about the way that these rules are going to be enforced. And it's a horrible kind of feeling. It's a horrible thing to even say out loud. But I think you know what I'm going to say. is that I just worry that the scope for corruption, for more bribery, for more cool drinks, for more breakfast or lunch money, that all of that is just going to go up. Because if you're prepared to pay whatever, 50 Rand, so let's call it 4 Cokes, to avoid a fine, what will you pay to keep your license?
702.
702.
Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, more opposition emerging today, maybe I should say yet more opposition emerging today, to the proposed changes to the Mineral Resources Development Bill. It would impose new regulations around transformation in the mining sector. The Minerals Council has already said it'll go to court over the proposals. The Mineral Resources Minister, Notshe, said he's ready for that court action. Now the International Zinc Association saying that the proposals would weaken our industry, and actually saying that they would be very, very serious indeed. Simon Norton is the Africa Director at the International Zinc Association. Simon, good evening. Why are you opposing these proposals from the Department of Mineral Resources?
Good evening, Stephen. It's very, very nice to be able to chat to you and to the business community. Well, in South Africa, the hot dip galvanizing and the galvanizing industry, which utilizes zinc in its refined form, has been declining over the last few years. Prior to 2011, we had a zinc refinery operating in the East Rand, and there was a zinc refinery operating in southern Namibia. Both of those have closed down. So we import all our zinc, and we follow that very closely, and we can see a decline. And our industry actually coats steel to protect it against corrosion. And for argument's sake, on an average mine shaft, you'll use 30,000 tons of steel. Now, that's a heck of a lot of steel and a heck of a lot of galvanizing. The majority of our galvanizers operate in the areas to support the mining industry. And if the mining industry is going to decline, and this legislation is going to really hammer the industry, well, we can't stand by and watch this. We've got to support the zinc industry and say, look, this is not on. This has got to be relooked at. And in fact, as the spokesman for the DA said, and I've got his press release and the details that he's dealt with in front of me, he said, look, scrap this act. And I say, scrap it. It's not going to produce more mining. It's not going to increase employment, and it's not going to boost the galvanizing industry. And that's really why we are opposing it.
Okay, but I mean, there is also in this country surely a strong argument to say there should be transformation. So what is it specifically about the act or the proposals that you oppose? What are you so worried about?
Well, firstly, one of the things that's going to happen is that there's going to be no more mining exploration unless you take up a BEE partner. Now, most spokesmen and most even legal advisors said, look, that's the death knell of exploration. Exploration leads to new mines. Now, for argument's sake, the mining minister, Notshe, went to open a visitor mine called Orion. But Orion isn't a miracle. Orion was originally an Anglo-American mine that operated near Prisca, and about 30 years ago, Anglo-American closed the mine down. Now, Orion have bought it over, and they are revamping it to produce copper and zinc. And at the time it was closed down, copper and zinc weren't as important as they are now for the green economy, for batteries, zinc batteries, copper for electric motor vehicles and all sorts of other things. So what we're saying is this act as a obstruction, it's a hindrance, it's less about transformation and more about bureaucracy. And the whole idea should be, and we say, open mining up, stop the restrictions, stop the the racial classifications, the BEE, all these sort of things need to be dropped now. You've had 31 years of rule to do that. Let's unleash the industry and let's get employment going and let's get the economy going. That's really what we're saying.
It does look like, and I hope this doesn't happen, but it probably will, that this is all going to end up in court. Would you join the industry in court in this?
I'd have to seek authority from my central office. I think at this stage the Minerals Council are very powerful in this regard, but we certainly would offer them our support and say, look, we agree with you and you need to take this up. You need to fight this. And you need to actually say, no, look, we can't go on like this. We have to look at it differently. If you just analyze the whole bill, there's so many problems with it. In itself, it's a piece of problematic legislation. The one thing I would comment on, and I'm quite surprised about this, because it said it was released by the Cabinet for public comment. And I'm surprised that the members of the Government of National Unity, particularly the DA ministers, were actually party to releasing this bill. I would have thought that they would have queried it intensely in cabinet privately and said, look, you can't go ahead with this thing. You need to relook at it, and sent it back to the drawing board. But that doesn't appear to have happened, although the spokesman for the DA, James Lorimer, has been very forthright in his statement. He said, look, scrap it. Just scrap this whole thing.
Thanks very much indeed. Simon Norton is the Africa Director at the International Zinc Association. I suspect that there are going to be big arguments about this for quite some time.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking. ABSA is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
We're good to hear from you tonight. 011 8830702 and 0214460567. More reports today that the National Agricultural Department is considering, I suppose, what would be a series of maybe major, quite tight restrictions on the movement of livestock around the country. Several cases of foot and mouth disease have been found at the Current Beef facility in Gauteng. The fact that it's in Gauteng means that it must have come, through another province, and that, of course, is hugely concerning. Wandile Sihlobo is the author and agricultural economist and analyst. Wandile, good evening. We've seen regional and provincial restrictions on livestock before, actually quite often. Is it quite rare for government to look at some kind of national response to this?
Not at all, Stephen. You will recall in periods between 2023 and the 2 years before that, we struggled with foot and mouth disease cases. And in fact, in 2022, we had the outbreak of this disease for the first time in 6 of our 9 provinces. So yes, this time around it's covered quite nicely in conversations, but it's in a few facilities. It's not necessarily the sky is falling on the South African livestock industry, but not to minimize, it's a serious thing. We are blocked in a couple of export markets temporarily until we get through this. And I think the measures of limiting the movements of livestock is ensuring that we don't transfer the disease from some areas where it may not have been already detected to some of the new areas. It's really being cautious about what we do in the response.
How tight should the restrictions be? And I mean, I realize that you could probably get 100 vets in a room and they would argue about this forever.
These things differ, Stephen. Even ourselves who are sitting in policy and economics, we get to be guided by our colleagues that are in the veterinarian side. But there are established ways as to how South Africa should handle this. And we are applying now, largely learning from those lessons, as well as some of the key insights that are coming from people like the Red Meat Industry Services and the others about how to handle this. But I think the core thing, Stephen, is about how should we as South Africa really focus on biosecurity, animal and plant health. And I think the first step is about revitalizing our capability as a country to produce some vaccines at OBP and the other facilities where over time we have lost capacity. And in part, it's why we are sitting in some of the positions that we are sitting in today. It's really a wake-up call, in addition to some cases we've seen recently.
I mean, we know that government has said it is trying to do to reestablish that capacity. Could take quite some time. There are all sorts of things that follow from this because, Wandile, as you all know far better than I, if you restrict the movement of livestock, there will be massive economic implications. Now, strangely, in the Eastern Cape, often, I think, where we often see this in Limpopo, well, that would be one thing. But in Gauteng, where the disease is quite rare, or certainly less common than in other provinces, when you impose restrictions on livestock, what is that actually going to mean? I mean, it will obviously affect Current Beef. I mean, they've been affected already. It's the biggest feeding place in the country, as I understand it. But the financial consequences are going to be huge.
I think, Stephen, the first thing very briefly to underscore is the fact that this disease comes from wildlife, buffaloes and the others. So any region that is closer to game reserves, that's where we call it a red line. If you think about Limpopo, parts of Mpumalanga, parts of KZN, those are the areas that would naturally have this disease, or normally, perhaps that's a better word, would have this disease. And the Eastern Cape was having it for the first time about a year ago when we saw this outbreak happening in human stock. So the key idea now about controlling the movement is to contain it in the areas that it is in. But I think the outcome of this is in two ways. One, the economic pain is in the farmers because the blockage of the exports does mean then that those folks that participated in the export markets, they suddenly for a period are unable to sell the products there. And now you have this situation of a slight increase in meat supply in the domestic market that as a consumer that doesn't have as much strong buying power, which means beef prices, unlike what I have been noticing in media covered, I actually think we're not going to see an increase that is that substantial. If anything, from what we gather from the past experiences, foot and mouth disease usually lead to a decline in prices. So profitability on a red meat industry side, it's where it will be. And of course, for medium and small-scale farmers that usually sell to large feedlotters, then this becomes a major economic blow even to themselves. Because now, if I'm current beef, why should I be going around buying all of these animals while I still have this challenge? And I think that's the major issue still.
I'm a little surprised by how long it's taking for the department to impose whatever restrictions it's going to impose. I understand they need to speak to people and consult, that's fine. But time is of the essence. Foot and mouth moves very quickly. I would have thought they would do it, yesterday rather than just next week.
Stephen, I wouldn't blame them on this because now we have to balance both what we deem as urgency in terms of the policy response, but also allow those that are in science to make really a serious assessment of what's going on. To the point I started with, it's not like every farm in South Africa is affected. It's very few. And we have some learning of the experience that is there. And I think the steps that they are moving in, I would judge them as appropriate. But I think what is rather essential is us as a country to increase our surveillance as well as investment on the vaccine manufacturing and all of the other ways of preventing this. Because the central point is that we are not alone in animal diseases. We see them in Europe, in the US, China, and everywhere, which means they are part and parcel of today's life. Therefore, investing in this as well as sharing the information with the farmers is one of the important things. But I would judge their steps still as appropriate. We are guided by scientists.
Wandile Sihlobo, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. The author and agricultural economist and analyst. So much to think about, and I suspect the foot and mouth story is going to be with us for quite some time. Well, coming up, we'll talk about criminality and your phone. I mean, yes, another reason to take it away from your teenager, but particularly what to do around the hacking of accounts and then how people go from hacking your account, WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever it is, to actually managing to extort money from people. And there's a major sort of a network there. There are major things going on. We'll talk also a lot about the JSE and its mix in investment school tonight. You're with The Money Show, 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the second hour. I'm Stephen Grootes with The Money Show, of course. Plenty to come. We'll talk about how it is that people make, it seems, quite a lot of money through the hacking of cell phones and Telegram and WhatsApp accounts. Looking forward to a conversation around small business as well, and how illicit trade's having a really big impact on some of our smaller companies. I'm talking about counterfeit goods and things like that. Investment School this evening, we'll be talking about the mix of the JSE. So the fact that there are shares that allow you to literally buy shares in gold mines. There are shares that allow you to buy, I suppose you could almost argue that Naspers is a share in the Chinese economy. Now, we'll be talking about that and taking you through that this evening on Investment School. Really looking forward to it.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
There was yet another conversation in Parliament this week around the gas cliff. The fact that the gas we've been getting from Sasol, from Mozambique, is going to run out. Sasol has said those gas fields are running out. And there was a comment, I think, by Notshe, the Minister of Mineral Resources, Mineral and Petroleum Resources, that it's very difficult to come up with a coherent policy because of the way the law is, etc. I mean, I suppose you've got to go and ask, well, why is the law like that? But it was really astonishing to me how we've known for quite some time that this gas cliff is coming, and yet it seems very little is being done about it. A few things are being done. There's a sort of artificial gas Sasol is looking at and things like that. But I just get a sense that we might find ourselves running out of gas. And you might find the only source of gas is actually to listen to The Money Show on the radio.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the analytics firm, they analyze blockchain, Elliptic, say they've uncovered an illicit marketplace that processes around $8.4 billion on social media platform Telegram. They also are talking about the increased number of Telegram accounts that are hacked. You know, of course, that there are many times, and this may have happened to you, when a WhatsApp account can be hacked. Siphumelele Zondi is our tech expert. Siphumelele, good evening. How does the hacking of Telegram and WhatsApp work? I know it happens, and yet they're supposed to be entirely encrypted.
Oh, totally. Hello, Stephen. It is supposed to be encrypted, at least that's what we get told. But a lot of people, I mean, as recently as today, actually, someone thought when I gave them a call, I was calling them because I was going to say they're asking me for money on Telegram, because a lot of people have been calling this particular individual to say, but what do you need the money for? And some people have paid the money. It's often through phishing a lot of the time. And you and I have spoken about phishing in other situations that are not about WhatsApp and Telegram. Sometimes you find that you would be sent what looks like a legitimate video. It happened to, for example, lawmakers from Europe, where a lot of them thought they'd see videos of their primary school teachers. And it turned out that the video was actually a link that was trying to get to their WhatsApp account. So that's one of the ways. Malware is another way that it can also happen. And sometimes you find that we'd be discussing work through some of these social media platforms and their work groups. And if they can access a group, then bingo, they have a lot of people that they have access to through that particular WhatsApp group that they sometimes can get into. So there are various ways that people can get to us and to get money from us and our friends and our colleagues or whoever else through these platforms.
I mean, what are criminals trying to do? I mean, in the end, I suppose often it's really about money, but could it be about influence too? Or something else?
It could be two things. Some of these details are actually sold in the dark web. And actually there's a view that Telegram itself is sometimes used as a form of the dark web as well, where some of these groups would exist and information would be shared, data would be shared, data of individuals that have been hacked, and it could be used in many other ways outside this particular platforms, outside Telegram. And yes, money is often the biggest reason, and sometimes even crypto, because there's been an issue in Vietnam in the last 2 days because they've blocked WhatsApp, and so people are using third-party plugins in order for them to get access to WhatsApp. So it seems like the hackers are now using those third-party plugins or using links that look similar to those third-party plugins in order and it seems like what they're looking for there is largely crypto from those that would be accessing these platforms, thinking that they're accessing a Telegram through another method because it's been blocked by the government of Vietnam.
I've been involved in trying to help people get their WhatsApp accounts back. If you have two-tier authentication, if you put in a sort of passcode, so it's a numerical code, a PIN number, that's the word I'm looking for, like your bank account. If you haven't done that, by the way, do it now. Turn the volume down and do it now would be my advice, please. But if your account is hacked on Telegram in particular, how difficult is it to get it back?
It is slightly difficult to get it back. So while you are trying to figure out ways and trying to alert them that you've been hacked, the advice that I would give is that alert all your friends through other platforms. Go on Facebook, tell everybody to alert them, and then also to be aware that you've been hacked, because people are going to continue to give this particular individuals money, and God knows whatever else they might lose. Maybe they might get a link, thinking they're getting a link from you as well. Meanwhile, they're trying to get into their details as well. So while you are trying to alert the platform that you have been hacked, and while you are trying to install, as you say, two-tier authentication and other methods and other passwords, but at the same time, alert your friends that this has happened to you through other platforms, and they might assist too, because they would still have access to their accounts So they might get the platform to say, listen, it's not that person who has control of the account. And if they have enough complaints, they might actually end up doing something about it.
This illicit Telegram marketplace, I mean, how do we even know what's going on there? I mean, if it's all encrypted, it must be quite difficult to investigate.
It is. So Telegram itself is now onto this, and they're using AI bots to try and figure out who could be running these illicit marketplaces. And they've shut down quite a lot of accounts, they say. But it seems like these individuals are moving to other platforms, but those other platforms might have less users on them because they realize that Telegram itself is trying to hone in on this and sort of get rid of these many groups that work as marketplaces that are using Telegram as some sort of dark web, if you will.
I mean, there's so much that's going on around this kind of thing. There are obviously ways to ensure that you don't get hacked. I mean, and that PIN code is a really effective way, I'm sure.
Totally. So it's basically that two-tier authentication. It's that PIN code. It's always being alert, right? And asking your friends when you get a link that looks a bit suspicious, or when somebody that you wouldn't otherwise have a conversation with suddenly says they have run out of money. It's happened to me in the past when somebody said, listen, I don't have money. Can you? And I picked up the phone and I called the individual. I was like, what's going on? And the individual was like, the first thing they said was, don't give them money. Other people have already. So it's for us to also be alert of these things as well, that they do exist.
And I mean, it does make running a business of these things suddenly a lot more dangerous, and more people are running businesses of WhatsApp and Telegram.
It does, because if they can then get a hold of the business account, and you probably have other, like your clients in there as well that you chat with, and they suddenly are sending information or sending links to your clients, and it does. And this is why we need to be, we need to always be alert, because it's our credibility. It's your credibility as someone who's running a business. If suddenly a link came through your account, that means you did not, for example, keep the details or keep your clients safe that you often communicate with, or that you often even sell goods and services to through this particular platform. So yes, it does make it a bit difficult, but there are ways, and it just that alertness, and also just be aware of the phishing that could be going on over there.
Siphumelele Zondi, thanks so much. Our tech expert, really do appreciate it. Again, just put, if you don't have the PIN number authentication for WhatsApp, if there's an elderly person or a young person in your family, just make sure that they have done it, please. 18 minutes after 7.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Small business focus. Well, you know how big the illicit economy is in South Africa, how many fake goods are on sale in all sorts of places, and how many times you might have been ripped off. Often we talk about this in the context of money being lost, say, to SARS or government. But actually, there are plenty of other victims. Loncedo Mtwentwe is the Managing Director at Vantage Advisory. Loncedo, good evening. Smaller businesses really seem to be at a real risk from this kind of thing. How big a risk, how big a problem is the illicit economy for them?
Good evening, Stephen, and to the production team as well. You are correct. The illicit trade in South Africa is really increasing at a rapid rate. That is really starting to surpass or to undermine legitimate businesses. The amount of money that is lost in the economy as a result of this. We are talking about over 100 billion rands. And when we talk about illicit trade, in simple terms, we really talk about the illegal production of goods and services, and all of these counterfeit and fake goods that are being sold that don't even meet the legal standards, or sold in a way that evades the taxes and truly undermine your intellectual property laws, your IP laws. You start a brand, and then someone starts to create a fake around that, and you go downtown, you see someone selling a replica of what you would have actually produced with the hard work, and heavily it exploits and uses so much of the informal labor or the informal sector. So therefore, the fight really against illicit trade in South Africa is ultimately just a fight for entrepreneurs, and really the integrity, it undermines the integrity of our economy and really the future that we want. So we're talking really over 100 billion rands per annum that is lost, in the fiscus. And that really does put, of course, the Minister of Finance in a very tough position, Stephen. You'll be aware that he's all trying to balance the deficits that we have in our budget. But we've got loopholes like this that are really costing our economy. I feel really as South Africans, we are not outraged enough as we're supposed to be, because at the end of the day, the consequences, the people that feel the pinch is you and me. Come by end of July when the ministers they pass the budget, that fuel levy that has been actually proposed is going to come and hit between me and you. Whereas if we had very good controls around the economy and good enforcement, all of that would have been saved and really be going to the fiscus.
Isn't the problem price? And doesn't that lead to a huge demand for these goods? And the lack of outrage, and you're correct, we should be more outraged, but isn't the lack of outrage partly because people are like, I want this, I know it's not real, I know it's not the correct brand, but it's good enough and it's cheap and I just don't have any more money. And that's really the issue. And that dynamic's not going to change.
You're correct. Look, at the end of the day, I usually say here, there's a willing buyer and then there's a willing seller, right? And therefore, we continue to really gamble with this, because if we continue to operate like that, we know there's a particular segment of the economy where the consumer, all they care about is affordability of the product. But however, we have to look at, Stephen, the damage that it does, the economic damage that it does, because you're harming legitimate businesses here at the end of the day, all right? And if we continue to do that as the willing buyer, and that's a normal citizen, at the end of the day, there are health risks that are involved in the process. We've seen late last year, there was a huge outcry in relation to young kids that would go and buy goods that we can't even trace where they were manufactured from. They don't even meet the legal standards. So the consequences at the end of the day, really, they do come back and haunt even that particular consumer that says, look, all I care about is the price. Because if we continue to do like that, we really undermine the state of our economy. If we want to move from a GDP growth of 1% to the likes of India that are growing over 5%, we have to really enforce robust compliance in relation to what will currently happen. Because if we don't do that, then you're going to have this situation where you've got consumers that are not well educated sometimes about the impact. So I think what we're talking about right now, I think is very good, so that the consumers are fully aware about the impact that it does at the end of the day hit you, even though you think that you're trying to save. But in the long run, the taxi driver, when that fuel levy hits, they're going to move that price anyway to the consumer at the end of the day.
So, all of these things are true. And it really goes back, it's another consequence, isn't it, of sort of very weak policing and weak enforcement. And we all know how big this problem is. The problem, Roncedo, is, you and I both know that, well, let me say it. You can choose whether to agree or not. Is that I just don't see the police stepping this up. SARS maybe, but even then, the amount. More money I think goes through those inner sort of Joburg CBD markets than through Sandton City on a sort of daily basis. They're the same size, those two economies. You really are trying to stop a huge amount of material, and it's a really, really big effort.
It is, and one of the biggest problems that we have in South Africa is the fact that the law enforcement agencies are heavily underfunded to really deal with this. Also, you have an issue where your border management controls as well are not effective enough as they're supposed to be, right? And then you have SARS really trying as much as they can to really work around the customs. We've seen that in terms of the work they've done at the airports, at the ports as well, what they've done. But it is still not enough. You would have seen they were given just extra about 7 billion rands that they have to really invest in their systems and processes. However, that is still not enough if you're losing over 100 billion. So there is that gap in terms of it's not only government that has to play a role. Here you've got SARS, you've got businesses that have to play their role, you've got government that have to play their role. However, the citizens as well, the consumers as well, have to really come into the party if they want to see this country to change. Because we can't continue to blame government at all times. Yes, we know that law enforcement agencies are underfunded. But however, to reduce this as well, it's important that the consumers as well do play their role to say, let us buy goods that we know are credible enough. And of course, you really can't compete with fake goods. Stephen, we know that. I mean, they sell this, at half the price. So it becomes difficult in other legitimate business to really compete. At the end of the day, usually out of business. We've seen that in small towns quite a lot.
Luncedo, thanks. Luncedo Ntwentwe is the Managing Director at Vantage Advisory. Such a big problem, and you see it all the time, really. In terms of sort of illicit goods. We know, of course, the problem with cigarettes as well. Lots of work for the agencies to do.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
Well, time for Investment School this evening. And if you paid any attention at all to markets over the last few months, you'll have known, and you kind of know I have to use the word roller coaster at this point, right? I mean, there are other words, but that's the one that I'll use, mainly because of Trump's tariffs. But here in Mzansi, our market's actually been a lot calmer. The JSE has been, it's gone up and it's gone down and all the rest. But it's actually, its response has been a lot more muted than the results of other indices. And there are important reasons for that. And that tells us something about the nature of the JSE. And that is the conversation we're having on the Money Show this evening. Chantal Marx is the Head of Equity Research at FMD Wealth and Investments. Asanda Notshe is the Chief Investment Officer at Mazi Asset Management. Thank you both for coming in. Chantal, let me just start with you. I mean, on one level, the JSE has had an easier ride than most other places. What does that tell us about the exchange?
It tells us that we have an extremely diversified exchange. And importantly, we have a geographically diversified exchange. It's not just focused on South Africa. In fact, half of the JSE All-Share Index is made up of rand hedge stocks or stocks that earn their revenue in US dollars. So that tells us that when the rand actually weakens, like it would in a shock scenario, you have some protection on the JSE. And then the other important factor to consider, especially during times of volatility and uncertainty, is that 11% of the JSE All-Share Index is made up of gold mining shares. So when the gold price goes up, these shares react very violently to the upside and you get further protection.
I mean, we've seen that so many times when you see it with platinum today as well. Asanda, is that quite rare? I mean, it is the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. I mean, it did start in Kimberley, if I recall, but it is the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And yet, so much of it is about things that happen elsewhere. Now, I understand that, what happens on the New York Stock Exchange, or where they are, is actually, determined certainly by things that happen in Beijing. But still, it's extraordinary.
It is. And I think, as Chantal said, there is a lot of diversity in the nature or the composition of the stock exchange in terms of companies that have got exposure to different countries, different currencies. I suppose it is somewhat historical. So some of it, if you think about companies like, you could say, Anglo-American, BTI, British American Tobacco, some of it does have its history. Anheuser-Busch, for instance, as a consequence of the buyout of SAB. And so it is also the nature of capital markets these days, where you've got these companies listing in different places for various reasons. So, Anheuser-Busch is listed here and maybe in other places, as BTI. But I think what's interesting is that the listing itself is not an indication of where the company's activities are, as would be the case in the case of some of these companies. And so I think what we've seen with the JSE, if you look at some of our gold miners, some of them actually don't have operations in South Africa anymore.
Yeah.
But they listed here as a consequence of history and in the past. And I think it's an important aspect of the JSE, which perhaps we might lose in looking at the numbers overall, i.e. there is a large chunk of the money that gets invested in the JSE that actually doesn't have any reaction or doesn't have any link to activity that's happening in South Africa. So you might be investing in the JSE thinking, I'm in South Africa and so on. But actually a big chunk of it, as Chantal said, is actually not touching the South African economy.
So you're investing on the JSE, but no South Africans getting employed as a result.
Exactly. That's actually a good way of putting it. And I think further to that, if you look at the trend in terms of where the JSE's gone, it has been shrinking in terms of the number of companies that are listed there. Variety of reasons. Some companies have been delisted, i.e. they were cheap, somebody came in and bought them out. But in other instances, it's really people not seeing the value of listing on the exchange because maybe they think they're not able to raise the money or get the valuations that they're looking for. But I think it's also I think we need to look at ourselves in the mirror as well. The South African investment community does tend to be conservative when you look at things like maybe IPOs of new things, new ideas, venture capital type, if I can put it that way. And I think that does say something about then the way people think about raising capital when it comes to the JSE.
Chantal, in a previous period of investment school, someone made the point that, for example, if you are a miner and you're mining something that's or you're sort of a new miner, you kind of want to be on the JSE no matter where in the world you are because people here understand mining. And the only other place they suggested where investors understood mining as well, I was surprised, but I should have known, was the Toronto Exchange.
Yes.
So this goes back and forth, doesn't it? In fact, we attract people here because of our investors' knowledge of things.
Yes, so it's actually been a very interesting few weeks in terms of new JSE listings or announcements of new listings coming up. And Shuka Mining, I think, was the miner that recently listed. It's still small, it's in the development phase, but they were listed solely on the London Stock Exchange and then decided that Joburg makes a lot more sense to them. Greencoat Renewables, another company,
yes,
I think they're listing on Monday. I mean, they have nothing to do with South Africa, but it's a utility type company and it's got a lot of similar characteristics to real estate investment trusts, so property companies in South Africa. And they think the local investor just understands and gets it. So it makes sense for them to list here. There's also a lot of South African companies that I think, and that brings me to the third one, a lot of South African companies who think perhaps that this market is too small or it's not necessarily sophisticated enough to raise capital, particularly in the early stages of the development of your company. But look at ASP Isotopes. ASP Isotopes is probably going to list on the JSE later this year. They're listed on the NASDAQ. They're headquartered in Pretoria, their manufacturing facilities are in Pretoria. They're headquartered in Washington, but their manufacturing facilities are in Pretoria, which means that their employees are here, and it makes now sense to them to be here. I will not even think about the Renogen thing right now, but we can discuss that.
That's a whole episode on its own. Asanda, I get paid to be difficult. That means wonderful for me.
Right.
I made the point earlier that you could invest in China through a NASPAS share. If without NASPAS and the huge size of it on the JSE, would we still be having this conversation?
I think it is one of the shares that has, I think, reared its head in terms of us getting to this point. So at the moment, on some of the indices, it's circa 11, 12, 13%. It's gone all the way up to 20, 25 at some points, and then the JSE had to do something in terms of adjusting the indices and putting a cap to it. So I think it is an interesting case because what it highlights actually is that in other parts of the world, there is this enormous growth, be it in things that people have invested in via, I'm going to say like a technology type lens, which has grown so phenomenally that it's outgrown whatever's happened in South Africa. So it's almost like again another reflection point where you say, wow, there's actually people who've done so well in other places, and the level of growth and the extent of it has been so significant compared to our companies in South Africa. It's just completely shot the lights out. And yes, I think you're right. I think the conversation then gets amplified by what's happened with NASPAS and that development. And I think it's actually what you've then seen as other companies follow suit to some degree. So, Richmond is a big component of the benchmark and the market. As I said, earlier, BTI is there. And I think it's these companies that give you a sense of the diversity, I guess, of the JSE, but also the lumpiness of the JSE as a consequence of maybe offshore and global trends that are not prevalent in South Africa, but having access to those, and it's actually showing up how maybe South Africa has been relatively benign in terms of our ability to grow our economy, develop like innovative new things, which can also, catch the minds and hearts of people out there.
Chantal, if the JSE is so diversified and others are not nearly as diversified as ours in terms of they give you access to the South African economy through, Capitec or ShopRite or Spar, and they give you access to the Chinese economy through Naspers. Does that mean that our JSE is actually a much better barometer of what's happening around the world than other places? Or does the fact that gold is still 10% of it sort of say, actually, no?
That's exactly it. I think gold being such a big part and gold being the moves in gold miners relative to the gold price is so huge. So you'll have, say, a 10% appreciation in the gold price, but a gold miner will be up 100% as a result.
Was it always like that? Or was it only during this rally?
So it's the reason why I think this rally was very specific is that gold miners have become a big part of the JSE. And that is because we've had a proper gold bull run for the last 3.5 years. So if you look back 3.5 years ago, gold mining shares were about half, maybe even less of the JSE. So a big rally like that wouldn't have made such a big impact because it was at a 4.5% weighting. But at an 11% weighting, suddenly these moves make a big difference. And I would caution that if things ever calm down again, it will make a big difference to the downside as well. Nice thing about the index is it reweights every quarter, so the index will kind of reweight it down over time as well.
I think if I could just add quickly, Stephen, what's quite interesting is, we had GDP growth numbers out last week.
0.1%, yeah.
Right, so if you compare that against what the JSE has done, you'll think it's like parallel universes, or rather unparalleled universes. So you would think that the economy is doing really well if the JSE was a reflection of the South African economy. So I think that's another, let's say, marker or data point, I guess, to illustrate the point.
I mean, many people have made that point. You can have times when markets are very buoyant, but actually the underlying economy, it can be the other way. But in our case, it's sort of understandable. I think in the US is really where you kind of think, well, sometimes that doesn't make sense. Investment School is in session tonight. We're talking about the diversity on the JSE. Chantal Marx is head of equity research at FMD Wealth and Investments. Asanda Notshe is the chief investment officer at Mazi Asset Management.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
The Money Show.
Investment School.
The diversity, the market mix of the JSE. Chantal Marx is head of equity research at FMD Wealth and Investments. Asanda Notshe is chief investment officer at Mazi Asset Management. Okay, so if the JSE is so wonderfully diverse with this great mix, Chantal, does this make it the world's best place to have a passive index investment?
I think you'll, at the moment, probably have less volatility being invested in the JSE. But the reality is that our stock market, even though it's quite diverse, is still very concentrated when it comes to the biggest shareholdings. So if you look at the breadth of the JSE and you look at all the companies available to us, there is quite a diverse mix. But when you actually look at that index, it is still concentrated to very heavily towards the top 10 holdings. That is something that is a very similar phenomenon happens worldwide. Also, one thing with the JSE is you only have these two big stocks that make up your technology index, basically. So you will lose out on being exposed to themes like AI it's just unfortunate that is the case. So I won't call it the best, but I'll say that for now it could be one of the least volatile.
If that's what you want.
If that's what you want.
Yes, but you want return.
Yes.
So, Asanda, I mean, there's such an interesting process as to how this happened because I wasn't sort of paying that much attention around them, but before 1990, basically most of the economy was sort of mining companies that had diversified because there was nothing else for them to do. They couldn't go anywhere else, and that kind of was the JSE. So this has happened. And I mean, thank you, Koos-Bekker, but this has also happened over the case of sort of 30 years, call it sort of 20, it's happened over that period. In the States, we've been talking about US exceptionalism, capital flows going. If you had money, you basically sent it to the States, and that's now changing direction, right? Is it ever likely that it'll change direction for us? I mean, for the moment, it doesn't seem like it. The South African companies that are growing, apart from your sort of Capitex and ShopRites, are kind of growing somewhere else.
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of what you do as an economy, in terms of, call it industrial policy, call it where you value the places that you invest, dictates the attractiveness of that economy as a destination for investment. So if you think about, American exceptionalism as an example, ultimately you had, let's say, take the case of Apple. So producing from a lower cost jurisdiction, selling to a consumer market, be it the US or other places in the world, where the spending power is there to sustain the gross profits and the profits that they or the prices that they charge on the products. You have to have that spending power. How do you get that? It's then skilled people that have got employment, they're earning well, there's a middle class that's supporting. So it then really goes back down to the choices that we make as an economy. And I think we can't point to one person or another in terms of stoking that. So yes, we could sit here and say, well, it's education, it's government. Yeah, that's fine. We can say that. On the other hand, in terms of investing, I always have a problem with the passive investing and calling it investing, because with investing there's, I guess, an element of risk taking that one would think is associated with it. So I think if, as investors, somebody comes along who wants to start the equivalent of a Facebook in South Africa, people will laugh at them, and sort of send them off. So we then lose that opportunity to take advantage of this innovation, entrepreneurship, and so on. And so we might stagnate as a consequence. And so I think everybody in the country, from our respective parts, needs to, I think, look at themselves and say, how can I express patriotism to the cause in order for us to then become that destination? But it's not something that you do and it's one person or one sector of the economy. It's actually a countrywide effort.
I mean, I say that. I mean, you go to an investment seminar and people are like offshore rand hedge.
Exactly.
That's what they are. I mean, it sort of is what it is. So what this has done, Chantal, during this period of international volatility, I call it the Trump tariff tantrum, has really given us at least one index in the world that's had a much more moderated reaction. But there are obviously days where everything goes down, right? Or everything goes up. I mean, that must happen. There are days when, the JSE will plunge 2 or 3% because something's happened and gold is not where it is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that can happen, absolutely. I would say probably if the gold price is much lower and gold miners aren't printing cash, they will go down with the rest of the market. But they do tend to move outside of tandem of the market. And the other thing that tends to happen is you do have some support coming through from the rand hedges, because when there's massive risk off mood, right?
What's risk off mood?
Risk off mood is when investors just sell everything.
Yes.
Right? They're selling emerging markets. They're selling anything that's higher, that's regarded as higher risk. They're selling the rand. The rand goes down. Rand hedges are to a certain extent less impacted. But if their share prices in their main markets where they're listed go down too, they will also come under pressure, but not to the same extent. So yeah, you do get days that everything is down, but it's become a rarity that the gold miners react in tandem. And what's been very interesting the last few weeks is that it also seems as if the PGMs have disconnected from the rest of the market as well. So that gives us another 5%. So that's 16%.
Platinum metals at the moment are fascinating, and the prices really did move. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from that. I really appreciate it. Asanda Notshe, Chief Investment Officer at Mazi Asset Management. Chantal Marx is Head of Equity Research at FMD Wealth and Investment.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
Well, you're not as diversified indices in the US. The Dow Jones is up 0.28%. The Nasdaq is up 0.12%. And the S&P 500 is up 0.13%. That's where we'll leave it for the Money Show tonight. Back tomorrow. Good evening, 8 o'clock.